If you were born in the 1990s, you probably remember what it felt like to have a real life that did not need to be posted, explained, or constantly answered for. You remember calling the house phone and asking if your friend was home. You remember being unreachable for hours and nobody assuming something was wrong. You remember when boredom was normal, privacy was automatic, and friendship was something you fell into, not something you maintained through notifications. And now you live in a world where your phone follows you into bed, work follows you home, silence feels suspicious, and everyone is somehow more connected, but harder to actually reach. That is not just nostalgia. It is a split. People born in the 1990s learned how to be human in one rhythm of life, then got pushed into adulthood in another, faster, louder, more performative one. And if modern life feels strangely exhausting even when you are handling it well, that may not be weakness. It may be what happens when your body remembers a way of living that the world no longer makes room for. So, even when nothing is technically wrong, something in you can still feel slightly off. Not dramatic, not broken, just unlanded. You answer the message, you clear the email, you watch the story, you put the phone down. Then a few seconds later, you pick it back up without even deciding to. Not because you are excited, not because you are curious. More like your body has learned that stillness will immediately be filled by something. And that is part of what so many people born in the 1990s carry now, a strange kind of high-functioning distance. You can be in touch with everyone and feel deeply unreached. You can know what everyone is doing and still not feel close to anyone. You can sit across from a friend at dinner, both phones resting on the table like small glowing obligations, and feel how oddly hard it has become to fully arrive anywhere. Not because you do not care. Not because you are cold. Because attention has conditions. Connection has conditions too. The body learns from repeated rhythms. It learns what pace to expect, what kind of silence is normal, what kind of presence feels safe. And if you grew up in the 1990s, your system was shaped before life became this fragmented, this watched, this constantly refreshed. Which means some of what feels like tiredness now is not just overstimulation, it is mismatch. You are not just missing the past. You are feeling the strain of living in a tempo your mind did not first learn intimacy inside. And that is why modern life can feel so exhausting even when you are handling it well. You can function in this world and still not metabolize it well. Because being reachable all the time is not the same thing as feeling reached. So from the outside, people come up with easy explanations. They call this generation nostalgic. Hard to impress. Too serious. A little emotionally reserved. A little detached. Maybe cynical, maybe oddly private. Maybe low maintenance. Maybe adaptable in that quiet, almost invisible way that makes it look like nothing gets to you too deeply. But a lot of what people read as personality in 90s babies did not begin as personality. It began as environment. If you were born in the 1990s, you grew up inside conditions that taught your mind and body a very different relationship to time, attention, and connection. Saturday morning cartoons were not just entertainment. They were time-specific joy. You had to be there for it. If you missed it, it was gone. That made presence feel natural, not noble. Just necessary. House phones meant conversation had edges. You called. Someone answered. You asked if your friend was home. Sometimes they were. Sometimes they weren't. Access was not constant. And because of that, connection had shape. Then there was AIM. Away messages. Logging on and logging off. Digital life was something you entered. It was not yet the air you breathed all day. Napster. LimeWire. Waiting for a song to download. Waiting for a page to load. Waiting because effort and delay were still built into ordinary life. Disposable cameras meant moments were not endlessly reviewed, edited, and posted until they looked right. Encyclopedias and libraries meant information took effort. You had to go find it. You had to stay with the question longer. And maybe most importantly, your awkward years were allowed to fade. There were no smartphones at school recording every strange phase, every bad haircut, every embarrassing joke, every version of you that was trying and failing and changing in public. You could be unfinished without becoming evidence. You could be weird without becoming content. You could disappear for hours and nobody assumed silence meant danger, rejection, or neglect. That matters more than people think. because you did not grow up performing your personality in real time. You had years of becoming that were allowed to be messy and undocumented. You learned how to be a person before you learned how to be visible. So yes, maybe you do seem different now. Maybe part of you does resist the speed, the exposure, the constant self-display, the pressure to translate every moment into something shareable, legible, and immediate. But that does not make you outdated. It means your system was shaped under different rules. The world calls this nostalgia because that is easier than admitting an entire generation was trained by conditions that no longer exist. And this is the part people miss when they reduce all of it to nostalgia. The nervous system does not develop in theory. It develops in repeated conditions, in pace, in pattern, in what the body comes to expect from everyday life. So when people born in the 1990s seem different now, it is not only because they remember different things, it is because they were shaped by different rhythms. Before social media, experience was not automatically split in two. You did not have to live a moment while also half watching yourself live it. A family gathering was just a family gathering. A joke landed or it didn't. A vacation existed where it happened, not later as a performance of where you had been. Middle school awkwardness was still painful, but it was temporary. It could fade. Your bad haircut, your weird outfit, your failed attempt at being cool did not become permanent evidence. That matters. Repetition shapes attention, and attention shapes experience. When you are always being watched, even a little, part of the mind starts organizing life around how it appears. Self-consciousness changes what a moment feels like from the inside. Identity forms differently when it is constantly meeting its own reflection. People born in the 1990s spent crucial years before that became normal. Joy did not need proof. Embarrassment did not become archive. Attention was less divided by self-observation. You were allowed to have a self before you were asked to have a brand. And then there was boredom, waiting, empty time that was not immediately sedated. You sat in the back seat, staring out the window with nothing to do. You waited for your friend to call back. You waited for the radio to play the song you liked and hoped the DJ would not talk over the beginning. You waited for the dial-up page to load. You waited for photos to come back developed. You waited because wanting something and getting it were not yet fused into one frictionless motion. And that kind of waiting likely leaves an imprint. Not because it makes one generation morally better, not because suffering is secretly good for you, but because the mind adapts to what is repeated. When there is no instant relief for every small discomfort, the system may learn a different relationship to delay, anticipation, and emptiness. It may learn that boredom does not kill you, that wanting can survive a pause, that not every restless feeling needs to be numbed the second it appears. This is probably part of why so many 90s babies can feel both overstimulated by modern life and weirdly hungry for something slower without fully knowing why. They did not just learn patience. They learned that not every silence had to be escaped. And then there is the part that may matter most: privacy. Today, people talk about privacy like it is a setting, something you manage, something you toggle on and off if you are careful enough. But for people who grew up in the 1990s, privacy was still a condition of development. Your mistakes could dissolve. Versions of you could die quietly. Identity was allowed to mutate off stage. There was no viral clip of your worst joke, no permanent screenshot of your most awkward teenage conversation, no expectation that every social moment might become content. You could be weird in public without becoming public. You could have unfinished thoughts, unfinished style, unfinished confidence, unfinished selfhood, and most of it would simply pass. That is not a sentimental detail. That is developmental space. Because becoming a person requires room for error that does not harden into identity too quickly. It requires phases that are allowed to be ugly, inconsistent, private, forgettable, and a lot of people born in the 1990s got at least some of that room before the culture changed. So, what many people miss is not the decade. It is the right to become unfinished in private. That is why this generation can seem both digitally fluent and emotionally unconvinced by the world they now live in. They know how to use the platforms. They know how to function. They know how to keep up. But some part of them was formed before life became this exposed, this immediate, this relentlessly self-aware. And then the culture changed before this generation was done becoming itself. And once that new world arrived, it did not stay on screens. It entered everything: work, love, friendship, self-worth, rest, even the way exhaustion feels. That is what people often miss about 90s babies. They did not just watch the world change. They had to build adult lives while the rules were still changing under their feet. They were not simply learning new tools. They were learning new definitions of what it meant to be available, desirable, successful, social, relevant, and okay. That does something to a person. At work, the shift was especially brutal because it disguised itself as efficiency. This generation came of age just as work stopped being a place you went and started becoming something that could follow you anywhere. Suddenly, doing your job was not enough. You also had to answer quickly, keep up with every thread, stay visible, sound sharp in writing, manage your tone, monitor your inbox, check the channel, follow the update, circle back, hop on, touch base, and somehow keep your professional self assembled across a dozen little glowing portals. So now, dinner is interrupted by Slack. Vacation gets broken open by quick questions. You read email in bed because not knowing feels worse than knowing. You tell yourself you are just clearing one last thing, but your body does not know the difference between one last thing and never fully being off. That is why so many people feel tired before the next day even begins. The laptop is closed, but the nervous system is still standing by the door. And the deeper injury is not just overwork. It is that labor became visibility. Productivity became self-surveillance. Your effort is no longer only measured by what you do, but by how available, responsive, organized, upbeat, and digitally legible you remain while doing it. If you answer fast, people trust your speed. If you handle pressure well, they hand you more pressure. If you stay calm, nobody asks what calm is costing you. They were raised in a world where being unreachable was normal, then entered jobs that treat constant availability like character. That same shift reached friendship too. Not all at once, quietly, almost politely. Nobody announced that friendship would start thinning out through convenience. It just happened. Everyone stayed in touch, and yet somehow, many people stopped feeling touched. You know what your friends posted. You know where they went, what they wore, what they celebrated, what they captioned, what they are pretending not to be hurt by. But you may not know the texture of their actual life anymore. You may not know the weight in their voice. You may not know what they sound like when they are tired. Now, closeness gets routed through little signals. You react to a story instead of calling. You send a meme instead of asking the harder question. You text, "We should hang soon," so many times it starts to sound like a ritual for people who still care but no longer live in conditions that support closeness naturally. Adult friendship becomes calendars, reschedules, parking, childcare, traffic, emotional bandwidth, and trying to summarize the last 4 months of your life in 90 minutes over overpriced drinks, while both phones sit face up on the table like tiny emergency exits. That kind of contact is not fake, but it is thinner. People are more updated on each other now, but less felt by each other. Some friendships did not die. They were slowly skimmed down by speed, convenience, and exhaustion. And that creates a very modern kind of loneliness, one where your phone is full of names, your group chats are active, your social world looks intact from the outside, and yet something in you still feels undernourished. They did not lose connection completely. They lost how often connection used to arrive without being scheduled, branded, or buffered through a screen. And then there is love, where the same split becomes even harder to bear because now it reaches hope. A lot of people born in the 1990s were raised with a quieter assumption about intimacy. If someone keeps showing up, it means something. If the rhythm is steady, the bond is real. If you talk every day, there is some movement, some direction, some ground slowly forming beneath the two of you. Then adult dating arrived in systems built on perpetual ambiguity. Now you can talk to someone all day and still have no idea what you are to them. You can read tone through punctuation, affection through timing, sincerity through the length of a reply, and spend whole evenings interpreting 3 dots on a screen like they are emotional weather. You can build a strange kind of closeness through constant contact good morning texts, late-night confessions, playlists, photos, inside jokes, weekend plans that almost happen and still never feel secure enough to exhale inside it. That is what makes modern dating so psychologically expensive. It offers access without structure, stimulation without safety, contact without clarity. You can feel chosen on Tuesday and erased by Saturday. You can be ghosted by someone who knew your childhood stories. You can live inside an almost relationship for months and come out of it feeling foolish for grieving something that never became official enough for other people to respect. Modern dating did not remove loneliness. It digitized it. And for many 90s babies, that hits a nerve because they were shaped before this level of ambiguity became normal. Not because older systems were perfect. They were not. But there was usually more continuity between attention and intention. Now, emotional labor multiplies in the gap between those two things. A lot of 90s babies were raised to trust consistency, then handed romantic systems built on perpetual maybe. By the time all of that reaches mental health, people usually talk about it as if the individual is the whole story. You are anxious, burnt out, overstimulated, too online, too sensitive, not resilient enough, too nostalgic, bad at boundaries, bad at rest. But a lot of what this generation carries is not a character flaw. It is chronic recalibration. They have had to keep translating themselves across incompatible conditions, from offline to online, from privacy to visibility, from waiting to immediacy, from depth to speed, from jobs that ended to work that leaks, from friendship that happened organically to friendship that must be maintained like a second administrative life, from dating that implied direction to dating that often withholds it. That constant translation has a cost. You see it late at night when someone is exhausted but still scrolling, as if the body no longer trusts rest to come on its own. You see it when people compare their real confusion to other people's curated stability and call themselves behind. You see it when someone is quietly struggling but feels ridiculous saying so because nothing has gone wrong enough to justify how depleted they feel. You see it in the kind of tiredness sleep does not fully fix because the problem is not only physical fatigue, it is sustained internal adaptation. This is not fragility. It is accumulated adjustment. It is what happens when the world keeps changing the terms of connection, ambition, and self-worth while you are still trying to build a life inside them. And maybe that is why so many people born in the 1990s seem composed on the outside while feeling quietly over-translated on the inside. They learned the platforms, the pace, the etiquette, the performance, the new grammar of adulthood. But learning how to function inside a system is not the same as feeling at home in it. The world praises their adaptability while ignoring how exhausting it is to keep translating yourself into systems your body never asked for. And after enough years of doing that, something subtler begins to happen. Adaptation stops feeling like a response. It starts feeling like that may be one of the quietest tragedies for people born in the 1990s. They have spent so long adjusting to speed, ambiguity, exposure, and emotional fragmentation that many of them can no longer tell where their personality ends and their coping style begins, where calm ends and compression begins, where maturity ends and self-erasure begins. So they become the person everyone thinks is fine, the one who replies thoughtfully, the reliable friend, the sibling who has it together, the coworker who never seems dramatic, the adult child who can always be counted on. The person who remembers birthdays, follows through, shows up, says the right thing, keeps the peace, handles the logistics, absorbs the awkwardness, and somehow remains easy to deal with through all of it. And because they handle things, people assume things are handleable. Because they are not loud about pain, pain gets misread as maturity. Because they do not collapse publicly, no one asks what the private cost is. That is one of the crueler social misunderstandings of this generation. They learned how to stay functional inside instability, and the world mistook that for not being affected by it. But being composed is not the same thing as being unhurt. Being competent is not the same thing as being at ease. What looks like steadiness is often compression with good manners. And the longer that goes on, the more adaptation begins trimming the self. You learn not to be too much, not too emotional, not too inconvenient, not too eager, not too needy, not too disappointed. Not too affected. You learn not to ask too fast because everyone is overwhelmed. You learn not to need too loudly because everyone is busy. You learn to self-edit before speaking, to smooth your tone, to present your hurt in manageable portions, to make your interior easier for other people to receive. Over time, that starts to look like personality. People call you chill, grounded, easygoing, mature, low maintenance. They praise how little drama you bring into a room. They trust your silence. They admire how reasonable you are. And sometimes those things are real. But sometimes what they are admiring is the version of you that learned how to survive by becoming easier to carry. That is the paradox. The version of you that gets loved most may not be the fullest version of you. It may be the most manageable version, the edited version, the version with the sharp edges rounded down by time, overstimulation, disappointment, social fatigue, and too much practice making yourself digestible. People may praise the version of you that survived. That does not mean they have met the full version of you. Sometimes the personality people love most is the part of you that was cut down to fit the times. And beneath that adaptation, there is often grief. Not dramatic grief, not always visible grief, not the kind with a ceremony, a quieter one. Because people born in the 1990s are not only grieving childhood memories, they are grieving a mode of being alive, a form of attention, a pace of relationship, a self that did not feel watched all the time. They miss when hanging out did not require coordinating across calendars, parking, emotional bandwidth, and 3 reschedules. They miss when photos were for memory, not proof. They miss when being offline did not feel like disappearing. They miss when you could leave a moment unshared and still fully own it. And sometimes what hurts most is how hard that grief is to explain without sounding sentimental. Because it is not really about cartoons, CDs, dial-up, or disposable cameras. Those are only the symbols. What aches underneath them is something more intimate, a lost arrangement between the self and the world, a time when experience arrived with less self-consciousness, a time when attention was less extracted, a time when identity did not have to remain so legible all the time. They are not only nostalgic for the past. They are grieving the conditions under which they first learned reality. And the hard part is that life keeps going. They built lives, they pay bills, they answer emails, they show up to work, they text back, they make appointments, they care for parents, they try to maintain friendships. They carry debt, they move apartments, they go to weddings, they attend funerals, they keep up, they function. From the outside, that looks like adulthood. And in one sense, it is. But for many people born in the 1990s, some part of the self still feels unsheltered inside modern life, not because they failed to grow up, not because they are too delicate for reality, but because being able to operate in a world and feeling at home in it are not the same achievement. They are safe enough to survive, not always settled enough to feel fully alive. That is why so many of them can look stable while carrying a low, continuous estrangement they rarely name. They know how to move through this world, they know how to answer it, they know how to participate. But some private part of them still feels like it was formed for a version of life that no longer receives them in the same way. Some people call this adulthood. But sometimes it is just what chronic adjustment feels like when it learns to speak in a calm voice. And maybe that is the real story of people born in the 1990s. Not that they are better than other generations, not that they are deeper, not that they are uniquely damaged, but that timing placed them in a very particular psychological position. They learned how to become human in one environment, then were asked to measure their worth in another. They were shaped by privacy, delay, and unperformed presence, then pushed into adulthood inside visibility, immediacy, and constant interpretation. So, if part of them still feels split, that split makes sense. Their fatigue makes sense, their privacy grief makes sense, their discomfort with performance makes sense, their adaptation was real, and the cost of that adaptation was real too. Because what the world often praises in this generation, the flexibility, the digital fluency, the emotional restraint, the ability to keep functioning, did not come from nowhere. It came from repeated adjustment, from learning fast, from absorbing change, from staying workable while the terms kept moving. That is not nothing. But neither is the where. So no, this is not just a video about nostalgia. It is about what happens when a nervous system remembers one definition of real, while adulthood keeps demanding another. It is about the invisible tension of living between two ways of being alive and becoming so good at bridging the distance that almost no one notices how much effort it takes. And maybe the heaviest question is this. If your nervous system was shaped by a world that no longer exists, what would it mean to build a life that still feels real inside this one? Not more impressive, not more optimized, not more visible, real. If this felt uncomfortably familiar, you are probably not the only one carrying it quietly.